But there actually has been a little bit of really fascinating research, and the one that really stands out in my mind is this team of investigators in Spain, and they got a group of volunteers who were people who ate at least 5 servings a week of live culture fermented foods, including cheeses, salamis, olives, yogurt, a broad variety of different kinds of foods. And what they did is they did baseline blood work, looking at immune globulin and a couple of other indicators of immune functioning. And then they got baseline levels. Then they put people on a deprivation diet. After several weeks, they did more blood work, and everybody's level of these immune indicators became suppressed. Then they put half the group on traditional yogurt and half the group on new improved probiotic yogurt. And they found that both groups regained approximately equal levels of their immune functioning, but nobody regained the level that they started with until they were allowed to restore their diverse diets that included different types of fermented foods. So I think in terms of bacterial enrichment, diversity is its own reward, and eating different varieties of fermented foods actually is much more powerful than any single strain probiotic ever could be. And another thing is that I'll say that, I feel very skeptical when people say, fermented foods cure cancer or cure diabetes. They might, but you can't expect introducing a single food to completely, change the picture of your health. But I would say that, whether you are, a strapping specimen who feels like you're the healthiest individual who ever walked the earth, or, or if you're feeling the effects of aging like most of us, or if you've been living with a chronic disease for many years, or if you've suddenly been diagnosed with some life-threatening acute condition, no matter what the status of your health, simply improving your digestion and your assimilation of nutrients and your overall immune functioning can dramatically improve your health. And so we don't have to make outrageous claims about, curing diseases. And this is really my perspective on the health benefits of live culture foods.
Hello. I have a couple pretty simple, straightforward questions, I think. But one is kombucha. I want to talk about kombucha. So the colony that makes that mushroom, is that a diverse colony, or can you say about
Yeah, sure. A kombucha mother is an example of what's called a SCOBY, S-C-O-B-Y, symbiotic community of bacteria and yeast. And embodied in that, rubbery pancake-looking thing is a community of organisms.
So that's a more diverse than just that single strain that you were talking about.
Yeah, sure. And then, another SCOBY that is even more diverse than the kombucha SCOBY is kefir. And the kefir SCOBY looks completely different. It looks like, a little rubbery blob, like a floret of cauliflower. And it grows in the milk, similar to the way the kombucha mother grows in sweet tea. That's, Lynn Margolis, this very important biologist who just died last year, actually identified 30 distinct microorganisms that are part of the kombucha, the kefir community.
The other question is about to pound or not to pound. I took a class a few years ago making sauerkraut, and they were swearing that you have to pound it, and yet I think it makes it really mushy, and so I really want to know.
Well, okay, first let me say that there is no single way of doing any of these foods. A food like sauerkraut that probably, half the population of the earth, eats some sauerkraut variation most every day. There's not one way to do it. There's a lot of different ways that people do it. The essential condition for sauerkraut is the vegetables have to be submerged under liquid. That's a very easy way of accomplishing that, is to pound them, or really when I do it on a small scale, it's much easier to squeeze it. I just put it in a bowl, and I spend 5 minutes with my hands after it's been salted, squeezing the vegetables. But yeah, bruising the vegetables, breaking down cell walls, enables them to give up their own juice. You can also just add some water to it. You can ferment whole vegetables, by mixing up a saltwater brine. But there's a lot of different ways of accomplishing it. But the essential thing is getting it submerged under liquid. And how you accomplish that, there's pros and cons to all the different methods.
Okay, thank you. And last thing, speaking of adding water, so chlorinated water, is that going to kill some?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it depends what the concentration of water that you're using is. If you're adding just a little bit of water, the chlorine will be diluted and it won't matter. If you're using a larger volume of water, it will. A carbon filter will remove chlorine from the water. I don't know much about the Eugene municipal water system, but if it's actually chlorine that they're using in the water, it will evaporate if you just put it out in a bowl, or you can boil it off. If they're using chloramine, which is a new improved version of chlorine plus ammonia, which isn't volatile, which is why a lot of municipal systems are switching to it, then it won't evaporate off. Then you would need to filter it.
Thank you.
Chlorine. Okay, so if they're using chlorine here, then you could just leave it in a bowl overnight.
I have kind of a nerdy question.
Okay.
So you were saying that we're mostly made of microbes, and I was wondering to what extent we're made up of the microbes that we've been fermenting for many of our own generations. So I was wondering if you could speak to the potential that we've sort of, through fermenting, sort of been involved in our own evolution of our microbial flora.
Well, I mean, certainly, looking at the human microbiome maps, we are more complex than, just lactic acid bacteria. I mean, there are many types of bacteria that are, sort of integral in our bodies that are not lactic acid bacteria and are not the types that are, sort of commonly found on the foods that we eat. So, food that we eat is not the only way that we get populated by bacteria. I mean, during childbirth we are populated. You ever notice how little children stick everything in their mouths, not only food? I mean, that's part of how we get populated by bacteria. While we're nursing, we're getting populated by bacteria. Certainly foods cannot provide us with the full complement of bacteria that we have in our bodies. Some of you might have read that this year there's been a sort of popular new therapy called fecal implants, where they basically take some out of a healthy person with a healthy digestive system and insert it into the body of someone who has not had such a healthy digestive system, and they've had very, very dramatic results with that. I certainly don't want to suggest that I don't want to suggest that eating live culture foods is the be-all and end-all of, sort of bacterial repopulation that can happen. But I think that it is, an important way that we can repopulate certain of the populations. So yes, I would say that, many of the bacteria in our bodies came to us through the foods that we have been eating throughout history, but not necessarily all of them. All right, there's a little line there. So if you want to ask a question, just get back there. No, I think we should do alternate sides.
Okay. My question concerns bioaccumulation in the food, toxic bioaccumulation, especially at the top of the food chain. And do you think it's possible for, kefir grains to become toxic through bioaccumulation? And I ask that because of my experiences with kefir grains. I'm feeling like I got this kind of odd chemically smell after a long time using this particular batch, and didn't feel like I wanted to use them anymore. I just wondering if you have any thoughts on if the bacterial environment, how that might affect, maybe it helps toxins, because I know it helps in our guts,
Yeah, I certainly couldn't tell you with any confidence that that's not possible. I've never heard of it. And really, many kinds of toxic compounds actually get broken down by various fermentation organisms. So, for instance, there's some research demonstrating that pesticide residues, organophosphate pesticide residues, can actually be reduced by fermenting vegetables that have those residues on them. But just because certain toxic compounds get digested or broken down by fermentation doesn't mean that every kind of toxic compound will. And so I've never heard of that, but I couldn't tell you with any confidence that it couldn't happen that way.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks so much.
Hi, this is a kombucha question. I went through a period where I was making kombucha, and I was experimenting, and instead of putting a SCOBY on top, I poured in a couple of store-bought kombucha in the top, and I just let it sit until a SCOBY formed on top. Is that as good as using preformed SCOBY? I mean, have you ever done that?
I would say yes. I mean,
it has enough of the bacteria in it to do the full job of the.
I mean, basically, the SCOBY, when you put the SCOBY on top of your sweet tea, it is, it's fermenting it, but also like that community of organisms that constitutes the SCOBY, spreads throughout that solution, and that's why the kombucha, once it's exposed to air, will form a new SCOBY, because those organisms are all present in the solution.
Right, so basically you can grow your own SCOBYs then.
Well, you can, but the but is that, okay, remember a couple of years ago there was the, sort of like scandal where Whole Foods and many other stores pulled their kombucha off of the shelves because they had alcohol levels in excess of 0.5%. Well, some of the kombucha manufacturers have stopped using the traditional SCOBY to make the kombucha. And just like all the other, microbiology improvements to traditional fermentation communities that I described, microbiologists basically extracted some of the members of the kombucha community, but left out the yeast, which can produce alcohol, and possibly others. And so some kombucha manufacturers, and I couldn't tell you which ones, are using powdered starter cultures that are not full traditional community organisms. So if you're using one of the kombuchas that didn't use a SCOBY, it is not likely to produce at least a healthy SCOBY that includes the entire community. But some of the, especially the smaller kombucha labels, are still using the traditional SCOBYs, and there's no reason why, especially if you've got one that doesn't have, ginger or, so like if you've got a plainer flavor, they'll just propagate a new one. But another thing about kombucha is that, just through my conversations and correspondence with people, it seems that there are all these diversions of the family tree. So some people have great success adapting their kombucha mothers to honey, for instance, or taking them off of tea altogether. I heard from someone who grows kombucha on apple juice. Then other people try to switch their kombucha to honey, and it shrivels up and sinks to the bottom and dies. So, imagine, okay, there's this big room full of us. You could take us, we're all the same species, right? You could take us, you could drop us in some extreme environment with some, nutrient that's different from what we're used to. And, chances are some of us would be able to very successfully adapt and thrive, and some of us would shrivel up and die. And so, this is just how I conceptualize why people have such varied results with kombucha. Even though, going way back, they all might be from the same origin, just through mutations, they become differentiated.
Just one other thing. Is there a connection between apple cider vinegar and kombucha? Because I find the taste of them is similar, and sometimes they suggest putting apple cider vinegar in the kombucha.
Well, I would say so. I would say that the dominant organism in kombucha is Acetobacter, which is what makes vinegar. So certainly the acid flavor in kombucha is acetic acid, which is the same as the flavor of vinegar. But they're so in that sense they're related. Acetobacter is part of the kombucha community. Your substrate, the stuff you're making it out of, is typically different in kombucha. You're starting with tea and sugar rather than with apple juice.